I want to show you how I decorate this Roblox cake using fondant and edible image decorations. Now, I already have all of my decorations made. Some are edible images, some are fondant, and I do have videos on my channel showing you how I make two-dimensional fondant decorations and how I use edible images for my cakes. And I always make them a few days in advance. That way they can dry harder and stand on their own. I got my cake out of the refrigerator. It's iced in American buttercream and it's cold and hard, so I'm not going to mess it up. I have that fondant 8 topper and I'm putting another toothpick next to the skewer. That way it's not going to twist when I put it in the top of the cake. And I had to put those skewers in on an angle so they wouldn't show. So I can't put it straight down into the cake because the skewers are going up on an angle. So I'm getting a little bit of icing underneath it where it's going to touch the cake, the same color as that top tier. And do you see how I started a little bit over to the left and I pushed it down to the right? That way it could be center. I took a dry paintbrush and just removed the excess icing. And now I'm doing the same thing for this Roblox. It's a fondant Roblox logo. And I always get some icing underneath it before I stick it down to the cake and then take my dry paintbrush and remove any excess icing. Now I made this fondant controller a couple days ago, so it dried really hard, and I like to hold it up against the cake to see where it's touching the cake. I'm angling a toothpick down, so it's going to hang on here kind of like a picture hook. I'm just making a mark as to where that toothpick is going, and then I'm poking a little hole from the back. That way I don't want the toothpick to poke through the front. Get a little bit of icing down the same color as the tier that it's touching, and I'm pressing it against the cake. And then, like I always say, I take my dry paintbrush and just remove that excess icing so it looks nice and clean. And I do this for all the decorations. So I hold it up against the cake, I get some icing behind it, the same color as the cake that it's going on, and then I press it down. And then I like to hold up these decorations. I didn't know where I wanted to put everything, so I like to hold them up against the cake first and get them in a good order, and then I will glue them down. So once I get them in the right position, I pay attention to where they're touching the cake because I'm not putting it flat against the cake, just that right side is going against the cake. So I got some icing behind it. And then again, taking my dry paintbrush and removing any icing that's sticking out. And I just keep playing with the position of all of these decorations to see what I like best before I glue everything down. So again, I make sure I pay attention to where it's touching the cake. You don't want icing behind the whole thing because the whole thing isn't going against the side of the cake, just where it's touching the cake. And then you're going to take your paintbrush and just remove any excess icing that is sticking out. I like to have my decorations stick out from the cake and not just be exactly flat against the cake. I just feel like it gives it a modern look and it looks a lot nicer. And then with this name banner, it's still pliable, so I just got a little bit of icing behind it, and I like to put it in a wave. That way it gives it a little motion. It just looks a little more interesting rather than having it flat against the cake. And again, I'm holding this up, getting a little icing behind it and press it down. And I'm doing that for all the rest of these decorations and making sure that any icing that's seeping out the sides, I remove with a dry paintbrush. And then these little square fondant pieces, I'm just getting a little bit of water behind each of them and I'm putting them around the top tier and the bottom tier. And here is the Roblox cake with fondant and edible image decorations. How adorable is that?